Hey guys, it's me cyoubx, and today we'll be reviewing the Plasmacube ZhanChi. This is a bit different than my other reviews for the fact that this is the first time I've reviewed a modded puzzle, and I know that there's currently some controversy over the legitimacy of pre-modified cubes. The first few minutes of this review are going to be the same as my previous reviews, but as we go along I'm going to break away into discussion and talk about some things that I really want to cover pertaining to modified puzzles. Thus, I highly encourage you to watch the entire video before leaving a comment that I might address. And as a side note, I know many of you will dislike this video simply because of either the price of the cube or just the subject matter in general. However, when you do leave a comment, please at least attempt to be civilized. Remember that there's a difference between debating and arguing. There is really no need for name-calling or disrespect. With that in mind, let's get to the review. The Plasmacube ZhanChi is one of 3 available pre-modded cubes from the Plasmacube web store. The Gu Hong and Ling Yun are also available for purchase. The ZhanChi is listed as the looser feeling of the 3, and it's also known to have some catching issues as shown on the website. We'll see if this is true in a little bit. These cubes are going for $50, which makes them some of the most expensive 3x3s available. So the question is whether or not they're worth it. First, as an overview, the Plasmacube ZhanChi is a modified ZhanChi, so as you would expect, it is the same size as a regular Diane ZhanChi. However, due to the sanded plastic, the Plasmacube is noticeably lighter than its stock counterpart. The turning of this cube is insanely fast and is probably uncontrollable for a lot of people. Now, I didn't find an issue using it because I tend to use faster cubes. Even though it's a modded ZhanChi, I think it's important to note that it feels nothing like one, which is why in this review I'm not actually going to be comparing it to a regular ZhanChi. The closest comparison I have for the turning is actually a Wit 2. It has the same crunchy sound and crisp feel that I actually personally really like. As you saw in the unboxing, the corner cutting is line-to-line, both for regular and reverse. Now this is incredibly useful. I would never max out the corner cutting in a solve, but the fact that it can cut line-to-line makes smaller corner cuts easier. What I mean by that is, for a 20-degree corner cut, if a cube can cut 45 degrees, then it's not going to have any problem cutting a smaller angle. Now take a cube, say a store-bought. Yeah, that can cut about 20 degrees as well, but you have to use a lot of force. So when you're actually trying to cut that same 20 degrees in a solve, you're going to find it a lot more difficult. So even though I don't personally use all of that corner cutting, the fact that it's able to do that is a really nice feature, and it shows that any angles less than that are going to be really easy. Finally, as you would expect from a ZhanChi, popping is not really an issue. In the 600 or so solves that I've done, I've only gotten 2 pops, and they were definitely my fault. I was trying some stuff out on the cube, and it just wasn't made for such aggressive turning. So at this point, the cube seems promising. However, every cube has its flaws, and the Plasmacube ZhanChi is no different. The major issue I had with the puzzle was the catching. Looking at the website, this is to be expected. An interesting thing that I noticed was that it wasn't really an issue when I was turning really fast. It was more of the casual turning that I sometimes do when I'm not timing my solves that really triggered that catching. Overall, the build quality of the puzzle is really flimsy, and it does feel like it's going to fall apart. However, I found that the cube was actually really stable, and once I trusted the integrity of the cube, I was able to get some nice sub-10 solves. So even though the cube is actually really good, I wanted to figure out why the cube was catching so much and why it felt so flimsy. Taking the cube apart, we see some pretty obvious modifications. The large surfaces of the pieces have been sanded, and there is very obvious rounding on the centerpiece and the corner base. None of these mods should have an effect on the sturdiness of the cube, so there must have been a mod done to the edge to make the structure less sturdy. And this is indeed the case. Looking at the edge piece, you can see how the base has been thinned out. Holding it between 2 corners, you can see a huge space between the corner base and the edge base. Because of this space, the corner is able to slightly flex and rotate, which would cause catching and probably corner twists. I immediately found this to be troubling and hypothesized that rebuilding the edge base would actually solve this issue. So to test my hypothesis, I acquired some epoxy putty and molded it onto the edge piece to effectively erase the mod. Now, this was the first time I used epoxy putty, so it doesn't look the best. However, the job was good enough that I could clearly see the effect. Turns out I was right. Rounding this edge base drastically improved the stability of the puzzle, and the catching is no longer there. Even though the cube is a lot slower and the corner cutting is pretty much gone, I was at least able to show that the catching was due to the corner pieces lacking support near the center. It seems like this was a case of over-modding. Less is oftentimes more, and I think the Plasmacube definitely could use less. I think if the edge bases were left unmodded, the cube would probably be my main speed cube, but because it was modded, it lost stability, and in turn the catching made it slightly undesirable for my style. Recommending a cube like this is difficult because people have different preferences and different values for buying cubes. I will say that I found this cube to have the best M-slice I've ever felt on any cube, so if you use Rue, this might be a cube that you want to look into. For the rest of us, I'm going to say maybe on the Plasmacube ZhanChi, but a definite yes to Plasmacubes. The website does state that the ZhanChi has a loose feeling and that it does catch a little, so nothing that I experienced was unexpected. So assuming that the rest of the chart is as accurate as it was for the ZhanChi, the Guhong should be a really, really good cube. It might be on the slower side, but it should be super smooth, and you pretty much wouldn't get any lockups, according to the website. I think this Plasmacube ZhanChi would be my main if only it didn't have that catching, and it's a really easy fix. Just don't mod the edge base. Luckily for the rest of you, when you do buy a Plasmacube ZhanChi, you can add in special instructions, and I do highly recommend you guys to just put in that little box to not mod the edge base. This cube does have a really nice feel, and I like using it, even though it isn't my main cube. Of course, I was able to test this product, and so I didn't actually have to pay the $50 for it. So we go back to the main question, is the cube worth the price? I know this seems like the biggest cop-out for an answer, but I can't tell you if it's worth it or not. Whether or not a cube is worth it is based completely on your view of products and your socioeconomic status. Someone who has $20 for cubes probably isn't going to buy a Plasmacube. On the other hand, someone who has a $200,000 budget just for cubes probably wouldn't mind risking $50. The other parameter is the objective of buying a cube. Do you buy a cube because you want to get a faster time, or do you buy a cube because you want a better feel? To me, modded cubes are for different feels. It just so happens that a lot of mods really do improve performance, such as the Florian mod, but a great example is cyoubx cubes. You should never buy a cyoubx cube expecting to get faster times, because that's not what they're for. It's meant to give you a better feel, and in most cases, this is true. With that in mind, buying modded cubes is always a risk, because you don't know if you like the feel of the cube until you actually get it. Thus, you're spending money risking on the potential of getting a cube with a better feel. If it turns out you hate the feel of the cube, then yeah, you just wasted a ton of money. However, if you're willing to pay $1,000 for the best feeling cube in the world, in your opinion, then getting one for $50 would seem like a really good deal. So to be on the safe side, don't buy this cube. But know that some of the best things come from taking risks. If $50 isn't really a financial burden, I do think that the Plasmacube ZhanChi is worth trying out. Again, I do also recommend checking out the Plasmacube Guhong and Lingyun. Before I get to the final grade of this review, I think it is worth talking about the $50 price tag. Many people have said that that is a ridiculous price, and they have actually denounced the store. I'm thoroughly disappointed in these people. Degrading a product or store based solely on the price is petty and rude. I don't believe people are in a position to downplay a product without first trying it out. And since this is a new store, I know most of you who are watching this have not yet tried out a Plasmacube. A similar example to this is the cyoubx ZhanChi. I'm not going to buy a cyoubx ZhanChi. That's my choice. However, I'm also not going to be the one who bashes the cube and tells people that it's overpriced. How do I know if it's overpriced if I haven't tried it yet? The Plasmacube might be the best cube for you, and that might be worth the $50. It might also be completely useless for you, and in that case, sure, say the cube is overpriced. But I don't think it's a person's responsibility or duty to voice such polar opinions before actually trying out the product. A similar example that a lot of us can relate to is PCs versus Macs. Wilson Tech 1 made a video in the past saying that a lot of people just dislike Macs or even hate them because they can't afford one. This is absolutely true for a large number of people. Now, I personally use a PC, but I can at least appreciate Macs and why people like them, and I can at least admit that Macs are better than PCs in a lot of different ways. Regarding the Plasmacube, are you hating it because you can't buy one, or are you hating it because you don't like the cube? Considering you haven't tried the cube, I'm going to assert that you simply can't afford one, and so you're downplaying it, using any flaws you can find in the cube or the web store to defend your empty argument. As Wilson Tech 1 concluded, that's jealousy. But being objective with what I've seen with the Plasmacube ZhanChi, I'm going to say that it is a reasonable price. Again, the worth of the puzzle depends on the user, but looking at the craftsmanship and the time spent to actually mod these cubes, I'm going to say that $50 is reasonable. For the final grade, I'm going to give the Plasmacube ZhanChi a B+, and that's relative to the Guhong version 1 unmodded, which is benchmarked at a B. The Plasmacube ZhanChi is definitely not my main, but it is a really good cube. It's just not for me. It's wicked fast, has great corner cutting and reverse corner cutting, and has a really distinct, crispy feel. In fact, it's perfect, except for the single flaw I found, which was the catching. But as I've shown, this can be easily fixed, or rather prevented, just by leaving the edge base unmodded. I think with that issue resolved, this cube would easily be an A. But as is, the cube is really fun to use, and I'll be using it in a lot of my future videos. I highly recommend looking at the Plasmacube Guhong and Lingyun as well. And if you are going to buy Plasmacube ZhanChi, remember to leave that comment in the special instructions to not mod the edge base. If you do that, I think you'll end up with a pretty nice cube. Thank you again, Plasmacube, for letting me test this product, and thank you all for watching. Remember to be civilized and stay classy. Toodles.